Dungeons & Dragons, otherwise known as D&D, is a popular tabletop role-playing game which you play with your nerdy mates in your mother's basement. And yes, I can make that joke because I do play D&D myself. However, there was a time where this hobby was turned on its head and was firmly in the cross sights of Satanic panic. Hello! Welcome to Brain Spill, the laziest show on the internet. My name is Tank, and for anyone that's played D&D before, you'll know that it's just basically a bit of harmless fun. A game that encourages players to explore their imagination and live out their fantasies in a role-playing world. Dungeons & Dragons, the first commercially available role-playing game, was created by Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson and published in 1974. The game has been going strong ever since, but in the 80s ran into a bit of a sticky patch when the game hit the mainstream spotlight, and largely drew criticism from people who perhaps did not fully understand what Dungeons & Dragons was. It just so happened to be the time in Christian America where fringe religious groups would start popping up, such as Wicca or Satanism, beliefs which went against the norm and certainly was not something that your average middle-class Christian housewife approved of. This was reinforced by right-wing Christian organisations who would try and uphold values pointing blame at certain things, largely in pop culture, which would look to promote such abhorrent beliefs. Praising Satan. What's the world coming to? Now, anyone that's played D&D knows that it's basically just an opportunity to sit down with your mates, have a bit of banter, play a fun role-playing game and maybe order in some pizza. All good fun. However, someone from the outside that has never done it before may have a preconceived notion as to what it possibly is. Especially if there's any semblance of Satanism in the game, they're probably going to put two and two together and assume the worst. They might think that it's some sort of cult following, the corrupted youth huddling together in a secret to spoil over satanic rituals. Look, the most satanic thing in this game is probably when players decide to go full murder hobo and just completely ruin the game, but aside from that, there's not much more to it than that. D&D would come under intense scrutiny following the unfortunate death of a 16-year-old in 1980 who had taken his own life after ongoing depression and drug addiction. This had been ongoing for some time, but the private investigator who was hired to find him when he first disappeared from his room at Michigan State University pinned the blame on Dungeons & Dragons. Clearly not knowing much about D&D, he used this as a reason to help explain why this young man took his life. You know, despite the fact that there was clear evidence that he was struggling with his own mental health issues. But no, let's just pin it on the game instead. That's not the first time we've heard something like that happen. And, well, people lapped it up. It's an easy target, and if you want to make an enemy out of something, this is how you do it. This wasn't the only instance of this happening, however, as 2 years later, a high school student took their own life. Despite an article in the Washington Post at the time commenting on how he had trouble fitting in, his mother believed her son's suicide was caused by him playing D&D. It's a hard thing to grapple, mainly because as a grieving mother, of course you're going to want to try and identify what caused or drove your son to do this, and if you truly thought it was D&D, I'm pretty sure anyone would have done the same. However, she was a bit hasty in her accusations, and what she did was a bit ridiculous. She decided to sue her son's high school principal, who was running the D&D games he was playing, claiming that the curse placed upon her son's character in the game was also a real curse in real life, which resulted in this happening. Logic, where have you gone? I was of course going to give her the benefit of the doubt, until I read that. Anyway, she also decided to sue the publishers of D&D, TSR Inc., to which her case was dismissed in both instances. This didn't deter her, however, and she decided to form a campaign group called Bothered by Dungeons & Dragons in 1983. By doing this, she was determined to show that she was not going to back down without a fight. As a matter of fact, she described D&D as a fantasy role-playing game which uses demonology, witchcraft, voodoo, murder, rape, blasphemy, suicide, assassination, insanity, sex perversion, homosexuality, prostitution, satanic-type rituals, gambling, barbarism, cannibalism, sadism, desecration, demon summoning, necromantics, divination and other teachings. It almost sounded like she got a dictionary and just pulled out all the worst words she could find. Also, that one quote has probably now demonetized the video, so thanks for that. The obvious reason behind her doing this was to try and pull D&D into disrepute and pin blame on them for what happened. But it kinda did the opposite. As a result of everything that was happening and the media attention she was pulling to the game, D&D got more and more popular. People were interested and they wanted to find out what all the fuss was about. What is this mysterious D&D game? And how do I join a cool cult like these guys? A rift was forming, however, wary parents who were concerned about this new phenomenon and new young players coming into the game and learning about the enjoyment of rolling a nat 20 when you try and convince an NPC that you're a literal god kinda goes against each other. This resulted in behaviours of parents getting their kids to get rid of any D&D materials they had, binning figurines and burning manuals in holy retribution. The game again kinda went into the underground, and particularly in Bible Belt states, where this was a heavily debated topic, kids would kinda go out their own way to go and play the game so their parents didn't throw out all their D&D stuff. Come the early 90s, the creators of D&D were fully aware of the satanic panic that was ongoing, and took a number of active steps to try and quell the fire, trying to calm people down and distance themselves from the more demonic aspects of the D&D universe. By the time 2nd edition came out, they'd taken devils and demons and all of that out of the game as a token gesture for the people who were concerned about it. But there was still a palpable opposition to the game in the early 90s. Some people weren't interested in doing more than yelling or threatening. However, they felt that they had to react to this thing they didn't understand. They just wanted to insult the company and tell whatever employee they got on the phone that he or she was going to hell for doing Satan's work. People were genuinely upset about this, and people who were slandering the company and the employees based on the fact that their game was demonic and possessing their kids. So, as a company who had all these problems for so many years with no end in sight, I don't blame them for wanting to make the decision to take demons out of the game, if it means that those Christian moms will stop bitching at them. As does all things, these movements and the opposition to D&D pretty much died out in the 90s, and many of these groups that were set up to oppose Dungeons & Dragons pretty much disbanded shortly after, which meant that people kind of accepted it and realised that all of this satanic panic probably wasn't that much justified, and there was a downturn in play for D&D, but it never stopped being popular. Plus, in the 90s, nerd culture still wasn't cool, so us boomers had to carry the torch, and you younger people watching, you better thank us, because if it wasn't for us, you wouldn't have all the cool stuff you have today. Given the nature of D&D and other hobby games like it still remains an easy target for associating blame to certain things, much like video games have been targeted over recent years for various crimes and events that have occurred. Which of course is complete bullshit, but is still something which needs to be defended when it crops up, to basically remind the layman that D&D isn't harmful and certainly not intended to praise Satan. Unless you're playing a character in Dungeons & Dragons where your character praises Satan, then I kinda guess you are, but that's beside the point. My point still stands. If you like the video, be sure to like and subscribe. If you want to be notified as soon as I upload my next video, be sure to hit the bell button. And if you've got any ideas for what topics you'd like me to discuss next, let me know down in the comments below. As always, sources used in the video will be in the description. Honestly, in the whole life thing, I wish I put more points in charisma because it would have made this whole video making process so much goddamn easier, but we are where we are. I'll see you guys in the next video. Fantastic.